The fruit, in many ways, everybody, of the last many years of the work I've been doing is that we need a new apologetics as part of the new evangelization. Now, mind you, I'm totally on board with the Pope Francis program of encounter and outreach and emphasizing the positive. You notice, for example, in the Catholicism series, I don't say one word about birth control. I don't say one word about abortion. I don't say one word about gay marriage. Now, there were a lot of people that were saying, oh, you need to have an episode on the hot button issues. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. Because I think we get stuck. I want to lead with the beauty of the faith. I want to draw people into it. Because my conviction was, if you're teaching people baseball, what don't you do? You don't start with the infield fly rule. You know what I'm saying? You don't start with a particular rule. You start with the beauty of the game. Hey, look at this game. Look at the great players. Look at that field. Look at Wrigley Field. I'm a Chicago, bias here. But look at baseball. Watch it. Play it yourself. And then you will tend to learn the game from the inside, right? So that was my instinct very much. So I'm totally on board with that. Having said that, I do think essential to the new evangelization is a new apologetics. Now, when I was coming of age in the years right after Vatican II, apologetics had a bad name. Apologetics sounded defensive, it sounded rationalistic, it sounded anti-ecumenical, it sounded like we were retreating into the Catholic ghetto, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I don't know, maybe that was true to a degree. But look at in the wake of the new atheist phenomenon. In the wake of September 11th, a lot of that happened. When the culture, in a rather dramatic way, turned on us. Now, couple that with the sex abuse scandal, and you've got a lot of the mess that we're in now, where the culture looks at Catholicism in a very negative way. What do we need? Now, you guys know this, that we're massively losing our young people. The last stat from the Pew study, you follow those Pew Forum studies. The one that stays in my mind is the 6-to-1 ratio. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that for every one person that comes into the Catholic Church, 6 are leaving. I mean, we're hemorrhaging people right now. And as you well know, a lot of them leave during their time in college. Dr. Wu mentioned the atheist clubs. I know about that, springing up in high schools and universities. I know from the YouTube videos exactly what's blocking a lot of people today, especially young people. So it's based not on surveys or just abstract theorizing. This is based upon a lot of experience in the trenches. And I identify 5 areas that people really get blocked on. Now, if I'm lucky, I won't get to we'll run out of time before we get to the 5th one. I'll show you why. Here are the 5. A deep misunderstanding of God. There's a deep misunderstanding of God out there, and that's blocking a lot of people. Number 2, there's a deep misunderstanding of the Bible and how to read the Bible. 3, a deep misunderstanding about Christianity's relationship to science. 4, a deep misunderstanding of the Bible and Christianity's relationship to violence. And then finally, the church's teaching on sexuality. Those are the big 5. You see why, if I run out of time before getting to sexuality. As far as I'm concerned, based on 10 years of in the trenches research, what's blocking young people? God, the Bible, science, violence, and sexuality. Those are the big 5. So I promise I'm going to stay within the time boundaries. I'm going to be really brief with each one. The purpose here is just to give you a hint of the areas I think we should be looking at. First of all, God. There's out there a theory that I like that's called the Yeti theory of God. Remember Yeti, the Bigfoot, right? Well, Bigfoot, some say there's a Bigfoot. Some say there isn't. Let's find out. Let's investigate and look for evidence of Bigfoot. Does he exist or not? The assumption there is that there's this being out there somewhere in the world. There's this being among beings. And some say it exists and some say it doesn't. Let's go find out. Speaking now out of the mainstream of our great theological tradition, the one thing God is not is a being. Thomas Aquinas says that God is not an individual. God is not the ens summum, the highest being. God is not in the genus of being. It's a very interesting comment Thomas makes. You think about, I'm in the genus of humanity, and aren't we all at least in the genus of being? Aren't we all beings? Yeah, but God is not in the genus of being, says Thomas Aquinas. What does he mean? He calls God not ens summum, highest being, but rather ipsum esse subsistens, the subsistent act of to be itself. God's not one thing among many, however great. God is that subsistent, infinite act of being itself, in and through which all finite things come to be. Now, maybe you're thinking like Ray Geddert right now, like, why is he giving all these abstractions? Atheism is predicated largely upon the assumption that God is a great competitor to the human project. Go back to Feuerbach, come all the way up through Marx and Freud and Sartre, Nietzsche, all of them, all the way to Christopher Hitchens. What do you find? God is a competitor to human flourishing. Feuerbach, the founder of modern atheism, said, the no to God is the yes to man. That's modern atheism, everybody. God is a threatening being that hovers over our freedom, threatens our flourishing. Same thing in Marx, same thing in Freud. Sartre said, if God exists, then I can't be free. But I am free. Therefore, God does not exist. Now those are high-level philosophical positions years ago. They're now very much in the common perception of people. God as a looming threat. What's the importance of saying that God is not a being, but being itself? It means that God is not competing with us on the same field. It's not a zero-sum game, as though if God gets all the glory, I need to be denigrated. If God gets the attention, I need to be marginalized. No. What did St. Irenaeus say? Gloria Dei homo vivens. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Now see, everybody, there's Christianity, if you want, in a nutshell. There's Christianity. God's glory is that we are alive. He's not threatening our well-being. He's the condition for the possibility of our well-being. Here's just an image just to keep in your mind. Look in the ancient myths, the Greek and Roman myths. When the gods burst into human experience, what happens? People are incinerated. Right? When the gods break in, things have to give way. Now the Bible. Look in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. There's a bush that's on fire but not consumed. What does that mean? It means that when God comes close to creation, he makes it luminous and beautiful and does not consume it. Now, mind you, what's the name that God gives when Moses asks the commonsensical question, which one are you, right? So there are a lot of gods in the ancient world, and this is clearly a divine figure speaking to him. So he says, well, what's your name? Which one are you, see? And what's God's answer? Right, and see, that's the ground for Thomas Aquinas saying that God is not ens summum, highest being, but rather being itself. The very nature of God is to be. And that means the closer he gets, the more alive we are. That's the great answer to the atheist. Now, there's a whole theology behind this, but it's a path forward in dealing with this fundamental objection about God. Here's number 2. The Bible. The Bible causes a lot of trouble, I find, for young people. What's the Bible? Listen to someone like Christopher Hitchens or Bill Maher. Do you guys watch Bill Maher? Man, talk about overexposed. I mean, that guy's on constantly. What's the Bible for them? Oh, pre-scientific nonsense, Bronze Age mythology, old myths and fables and legends, talking snakes and whales that swallow people up, and all these old fairy tales. And you religious people naively take all this stuff in as though it's, gospel truth. The Bible's made fun of constantly, I find, in these YouTube forums. How do you read the Bible? Well, here's a clue. The word, of course, comes from the Greek term ta biblia, right, which is a plural term. It means the books. The books. The Bible's not so much a book, but the Bible's a library. It's a collection of books written over a long period of time by a variety of different authors to very different audiences, to very different purposes, and using very different genre, right? Watching an atheist after atheist, the attempt to make the Bible a univocal text, to be read with one clunky set of interpretive lenses. Do you take the Bible literally? Well, my answer is, do you take the library literally? Well, it depends, man. What section are you in? What section do you wander into? In the history section? Especially contemporary history, you might want to take that more or less literally. But you wander into the poetry section, you wander into mythology section, you wander into biography, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on what section you're in. The Bible, I try to explain to people over and over again, is made up of a wide variety of different genres. From saga, legend, yes. Quasi-history, yes. Theologically interpreted history, very often. Poetry, psalms, letters, apocalypse, etc., all different literary genres. See, I wonder if you agree with me. One of the problems I find is the breakdown in the humanities, where an awful lot of, especially young people, don't know how texts mean anymore. Do you find that? That there's such a dominance of science, and I'll get to that in a second, such a dominance of the scientific model that the binary option emerges of science or nonsense. But how subtly texts mean across a variety of genre is largely lost on people. But until you get that, you won't get the Bible right. I love this from William Plaker. Do you know him? Died just a few years ago, a great Protestant biblical scholar. He distinguished between what's in the Bible and what the Bible teaches. It's a very useful distinction, I think. People will always tell you what's in the Bible. They'll draw something out. That's in the Bible. But what does the Bible teach? That depends, Plaker says, on patterns, themes, and trajectories within the Bible, right? And I often find myself urging people to look at that. Don't take up any passage and tell me, well, here's what the Bible teaches. That'll never tell you the truth of it. But patterns, themes, and trajectories within and across the genres of the Bible, that will tell you much more accurately what the Bible teaches. And the last comment here is the necessity of reading the Bible in the church. Because I'll come back with this argument, they'll say, well, how do you know all this? Or how do you make these determinations? And I'll say, that's why you need to read the Bible within this grand and long and complex interpretive tradition that we call the church. I'll use the example of Shakespeare. Would you ever think it's wise to pick up Hamlet and hand it to a 17-year-old and say, just read it? You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Or pick up Moby Dick or The Wasteland of T.S. Eliot and say, just read it, you'll be fine. Come on. No, there's a whole family of interpretation around Hamlet and Shakespeare. There's a universe of interpretation around T.S. Eliot. And it's within that matrix that we understand these texts. A fortiori with the complex collection of texts in the Bible, to read it in and with the interpretive tradition of the church. I urge people all the time. Third major problem, Christianity in relation to science. Every day, I would say, I deal with some version of this problem. Christianity in relation to science. Again, what's religion? Bronze Age mythology, texts written when people had no idea what a bacterium is, ancient nonsense, blah, 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 right? One of my great professors, he's still alive at Catholic University, it was Robert Sokolowski, one of the really great Catholic philosophers, I think, still writing today. He told us years ago, and I found this borne out over and over again, that modernity needs to tell its own myth of origin over and over again, almost in a ritualistic way. What did he mean? The myth that modernity emerged only after a long twilight struggle against the obscurantism and superstition of religion, right? How often have you heard that story or seen it told? Only after this long, terrible struggle, read Dan Brown if you want a pop version of it. Only after this long, terrible struggle did the sciences and the liberal democracies emerge, right? Now, who's the tragic hero of this story? Galileo, whom I find mentioned almost every day on my YouTube forums in some way. Galileo, the heroic scientist who battled against these backward-looking clerics who were trying to stop him. Now, I won't dwell on Galileo, which is a complicated story in itself, but I tell people this. Galileo is one paragraph in one chapter of a very long book, the book of the play between religion and science. And to reduce that book to the one paragraph in the one chapter is beyond tragic. And then here's where the thing really gets problematic. Rampant among young people is what I would call scientism. What's scientism? It's the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge, right? Now, we all know, everyone knows, the sciences, thank God for them, have been massively successful, and their attendant technologies. I mean, who would we lionize in our society but, a Bill Gates and a Steve Jobs, the people that have given us the technology that we use. In fact, it's all around us. It's in my pocket here, Great. But I love what the Cardinal said last night in the clip that they showed. Sciences are wonderful, but they can't begin to tell you anything about what makes an act good or evil. They can analyze the Sistine Chapel ceiling, tell you what it's made out of. They can't begin to tell you why it's beautiful or what it means. They could analyze the ink on the page of Moby Dick, but they couldn't begin to tell you the purpose of that novel. They can't tell you, mind you, why there's something rather than nothing. See, all of those are extra scientific questions. But there's a tendency among the young people to reduce all knowledge to the scientific form, based upon the scientific method of observation and hypothesis formation and experimentation and repetition of experiments, et cetera, et cetera. Great method, super productive. The problem is a logical one, finally, because scientism is self-refuting. Like my saying, I speak no English. Right? It's a self-refuting statement. To make the statement is to undermine what you're saying. Scientism is not itself a scientific proposition. See what I mean? Is the view that all knowledge is reducible to the scientific form of knowledge is not something that the scientific method can generate. It's a philosophical statement. And so scientism undermines itself. See, again here, I do think the breakdown of the humanities is part of the problem. Is that we've so elevated the sciences in our culture, we've so lionized scientists, that we've forgotten other paths of knowing. And see, I remember David Tracy, the great theologian, said that religion is a closer cousin to poetry than to science. And there's something right about that. That if we try to relate it all the time to science, we're going to miss something. It's a closer cousin to the way poets know. And then here's a last thing. I think a far more compelling story of origin is not the modern myth of the twilight struggle against religion. I think rather the physical sciences emerged where and when they did precisely because of Christianity. Now, many people have rehearsed this story, but I think it's a compelling one. Namely, they had to come out of a matrix that took the doctrine of creation seriously. Now, why? Why? If you take creation seriously, the first thing you know is the world is not God. Right? It's not divine. And from ancient animisms all the way to Star Wars, you have this view of like the divinity of nature. No, but if nature's a creature, we don't worship it. We are permitted, in fact, to observe it, to analyze it, to dissect it, to experiment upon it. It's not God, it's a creature. Second presupposition that makes the sciences possible, the assumption that nature is radically intelligible, right? Whether you're a psychologist, you're a biologist, you're a chemist, you're a physicist, the one thing you have to assume is the being you're going to meet has an intelligible structure. That's a strange thing the more you think about it. But all of science takes it for granted as an assumption. Where'd that come from? In the beginning was the Word. And through that Word, God spoke the world into being. What does that mean, that symbolic language? But that all of nature is imbued with an intelligibility that comes from God. Those two assumptions, the world is not God, the world's intelligible, made the sciences possible. Therefore, I would say don't urge the war of religion and science, but urge this great congruence between the two. And then I remember some years ago I did a video, and I was so happy we found the picture of this fellow. How many of our young people know that the formulator of the Big Bang Theory, right, which everyone takes for granted now, the Big Bang Theory of cosmic origins, was Georges Lemaitre. Georges Lemaitre was a Catholic priest. And we found this wonderful picture of him with Einstein, because he had to convince Einstein. Einstein didn't think the Big Bang was right. And Father Lemaitre convinced him. Well, the picture, he's got a Roman collar that's about 8 inches high, this giant collar, and there he's next to Einstein. How many of our young people know that? How many of our young people know that precisely at the time of Galileo, so many of the early pioneers of the sciences were priests? Anyway, don't get me started on that. But these fundamental assumptions about scientism, I think we have to keep going on that. All right, I got one more, and then I'll run out of time before I get to sexuality. So we got God, we've got the Bible, we have science. The next one, again, I'd say practically every day I hear it. Christianity, biblical religion, is violent. Now, this objection, I think, came from September 11th. It was revived, I should say, revived by September 11th. What did people see? They saw an old Enlightenment principle on display, namely that religion is irrational, therefore violent. See, religious people, you can't adjudicate your disputes rationally, you people, so all you've got recourse to is violence. Go back to Leibniz, Spinoza, Kant, Hegel, Thomas Jefferson. You'll find that argument in the early modern period. It was revived. Now read Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. Revived in our time by September 11th. One thing I found is the opponents of religion, man, do they know the violent texts of the Bible? They don't know the Bible real well, but they can cite chapter and verse of the violent texts in the Bible. Their favorite is in 1 Samuel. When Saul is removed from his kingship. Now, why? Remember? Because he wouldn't put the ban on the Amalekites. And the ban meant kill everybody. Men, women, children, and animals. So Yahweh gives that command to Saul, kill everybody. And so he conquers the Amalekites, and he kills almost everybody. But he leaves a few, including King Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and a few of the animals. Well, who shows up? Remember the scene, the prophet Samuel. What's this I hear? He hears the bleating of animals, and he hears the talking, and he sees Agag, the king. What's this? Oh, Saul says, well, I basically put the ban on him, Samuel, but I kept a few. And then Samuel declares that Saul is no longer king. And then it says, took a sword, and he hacked Agag to pieces. The word of the Lord. Trust me, all the opponents, they know these texts in the Bible. And we know them too. Pope Benedict called them the hard texts in the Bible, these hard texts. Okay. Every day I hear someone say biblical religion is violent, and that's why it gives rise to so much trouble. Okay. Let me just give you one path on this. One path. It's a complex thing, obviously. Go back to the 3rd century and the great Origen of Alexandria, one of the greatest of the church fathers, who understood this problem in his bones. Origen knew the Old Testament really well. He also knew Christ. And he said basically, how do you reconcile these texts with the crucified Jesus? Here was Origen's answer, which I think is still compelling. Remember Plaker's thing about trajectories within the Bible. Don't take a particular text out, but look at themes and patterns and trajectories. What's the ultimate trajectory of the whole Bible? Origen said. The last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Remember the scene, they're up in the heavenly court, and a scroll is presented that's sealed with 7 seals. And the scroll represents, you could say, the whole of the Bible or the whole of history. And who will unroll the scroll? Who will read it? And no one appears. And so the visionary begins to weep, That's the way a lot of us feel, by the way. Who will read this text? Who understands what it's all about? And then we hear the Lion of Judah is coming. Great, the Lion's coming to read this thing. And out comes, remember, this little lammy pie, a little lamb comes out. And I'm saying it that way because the Greek is the lamb standing as though slain. So out comes the weakest animal you could imagine, a little lamb who's been slain. The weakest image you could come up with. Well, of course, he's talking about Jesus crucified. And it's the lamb standing as though slain who alone can open the scroll. Now, what's the message Origen says? It's only from the standpoint of the crucifying Jesus that the whole of the Bible is rightly read. Don't read the Bible apart from that interpretive lens. If you do, you will misread it. Now, what did he draw from this? Now go right back to Agag and Samuel. Origen said we must read these great texts as metaphors of the struggle against evil. How do we deal with evil, most of us sinners? We deal with it the way Saul does, right? God says, put the ban on it. And we say, oh, okay, for the most part, but I'll keep a little bit here on the side for myself, right? I won't entirely eliminate this wickedness or this evil, but I'll keep a little bit. Suppose I went to Archbishop Gomez, my new boss out in L.A., and I said, Archbishop, I love being a bishop, and I love my new life out there, and I'm confirmed in my priesthood after 30 years, and that's why I'm celibate 90% of the time. Right? Or, honey, I love you with all my heart. You're my whole life, which is why I'm faithful to you, 75% of the time. Would you be happy with that? The doctor says, yeah, we got 90% of that cancer out of you. There are certain forms of evil that have to be done to death. You got to wrestle all the way down. They've got to be eliminated, not played with. Does that make sense? You got to hack Agag to pieces. See, that's how he interprets that. Now, keep the crucified Christ in mind. What do you see in that image? There's the lamb slain. What you see is the Son of God going all the way down. Think of Frodo going into Mordor, right, in Tolkien's great imagination. What does Frodo have to do? He can't mess around with it. He's got to go all the way down. All the way down. Jesus fought sin and death all the way. He hacked Agag to pieces. And that's why he's Christ the victor. Not Saul messing around. Not the king that's playing around with evil, but the king who truly conquered sin and death. That's Origen's ancient 2nd century, early 3rd century reading of these still puzzling, problematic texts, but at least I think it shows a way forward. Honestly, I'm going to stop. Maybe in the Q&A, you can ask me a thing about the last. The 5, again, just to review them, and I'll close with this. Can I recommend to all of you in your campus ministry? It's based on 10 years of smell of the sheep, in the trenches, work with people. I think if you put a program together with these 5 themes, I think you get a lot of kids and a lot of interest. Get your best person in your campus or in your part of the world on God, to talk about God. What does God mean for serious believers? Get someone now, your best Bible person, maybe at your university or somewhere nearby. Get your best Bible person. How to read the Bible. Thirdly, get a scientist. We got one at this table right here. Get a scientist who still has the faith. And to talk about religion and science. Maybe talk about Galileo. Maybe talk about the origins of the sciences, etc. Maybe bring another Bible person back and talk about violence in relation to the Bible. And then lastly, someone to talk about the theology of the body and human sexuality. I think those 5 you're going to find people coming to the talk, and we'll find it compelling. And then the very last thing I absolutely promise now is just to leave you with a sense of hopefulness, I hope, about what we can do. Go back 16 years or so. I mean, I saw none of this on my horizon, the Word on Fire work, none of it, until that priest challenged me. And I think it was the voice of the Holy Spirit, kind of saying, all right, buddy, stop complaining and do something about it. And I think if you do, and you do it with confidence, intelligence, and panache, I think people respond, and they'll come and join you. And I think, friends, we all have to do it if the work of the new evangelization is going to go forward. So, God bless you all. Thanks for listening.